everybody. It's great to see you all today. Thank you so much for coming to this event. It's been a goal of the AI Task Force to help to promote further discussion about questions with technology and such. So hello, everybody. It's great to see you all today here for this lecture. Thank you so much for coming to this event. It's been a goal of the AI Task Force to help Dr. Charlie Camosy is Professor of Medical Humanities at Creighton Technology and School of Medicine and holds the Msgr. Michael J. Curran Fellowship in Moral Theology at St. Joseph Seminary in New York. Among other places, his articles have appeared in the American Journal of Bioethics, Journal of Medicine and Philosophy, Journal of the Catholic Health Association, New York Times, and Washington Post. He is the author of 8 books, including Peter Singer and Christian Ethics, which was named a 2012 Best Book with ABC Religion and Ethics, Beyond the Abortion Wars, which was a 2015 award winner with the Catholic Media Association, and Resisting Throwaway Culture, which was named 2020 Resource of the Year by the Catholic Publishers Association. He is also the founding editor of a new book series with New City Press called The Magenta Project. Charlie received the 2018 St. Jerome Award for Scholarly Excellence from the Catholic Library Association and the 2024 Smith Award from the University Faculty for Life. So we're really excited to have Dr. Charlie Camosy here, so let's give him a warm welcome.
Good afternoon. Over 2 decades of giving lectures like this on college campuses, my radar for trying to sniff out extra credit has become finely attuned, and it's going off right now. So thank you to whatever professors have done that. I appreciate that very much. I have to say, when I got this invitation, it took me no time at all to accept it, not just because apparently my wife and daughter are having a text fight at the moment about whether she can wear colored contacts or not. I'm not sure how that's going to go, but I'm glad to not be there for that at the moment. But because of what you are doing here, it is, as you may know, something that the word is getting around about, and I think what you're managing to pull off both here as a broader institution, but in the nursing program in particular, is just so hopeful. And I'm glad to be this very, very small part of it. So I have a simple plan. I want to try to do 3 things. I want to try to talk about what Catholic nursing is. Sorry if this is too basic for you, but I start with that basic thing. Then I want to talk about what MAHA is. That's significantly more difficult because I'm not sure anybody really knows what it is, but I'll make an attempt to try to articulate it. And the third, I want to suggest how Catholic nursing is positioned to speak directly into the MAHA movement, such as there is one. I think also Catholic doctrine might have a chance to do this as well, and I guess there's some effort here at this university to make a space for this with the medical school, and that would be wonderful if it can resist the problems that got us into the messes that MAHA is trying to address. For now, I think nursing is our best way to go about that, which you'll see in a moment. So the first thing to say about nursing is that it's ours. It's deeply, profoundly Catholic. We have so much to learn, in particular, from the history of the religious orders which invented the discipline. And speaking of that, I wanted to know if any of you recognize this painting. Anybody seen this before? Anybody know who this sort of glowing white figure is? That's Florence Nightingale. Were you taught that Florence Nightingale is the founder of contemporary nursing? Dope. It's actually Catholic women religious who founded contemporary nursing. Over here is Mother Mary Claire Moore of the Sisters of Mercy. This is what they're doing right now, is sort of scoping out a place during where they brought wounded folks during the Crimean War. So let's just bust a myth right up front. It was the Sisters of Mercy and the Daughters of Charity that taught Florence Nightingale everything that she knew. In fact, there's a great book, if you're interested to learn more about this, called The Friendship of Florence Nightingale and Mother Mary Claire Moore, that has basically their correspondence with a bit of annotated commentary, but it's just a wonderful book that shows some of this relationship. I just wanted to provide a couple of quotes from it. This is Nightingale writing to Mother Moore. "Your going home is the greatest blow I have had yet. You are far above me in fitness for the general superintendency, both in worldly talent of administration and far more in spiritual qualifications from which God values in a superior. What you have done for the work, no one can ever say. I always felt you ought to have been the superior and I the inferior. I always felt how magnanimous your spiritual obedience in taking up such a position and how I should have failed without your help. I always wondered at your unfailing patience, sweetness, forbearance, and courage under the many trials peculiar to yourselves, beyond which was common to all." Doesn't that sort of describe the plight of Catholic women religious, right? Doing it all behind the scenes while somebody else takes the credit? Maybe it's not Nightingale's fault. Somebody else gave her the credit, right? Moore actually had a profound spiritual impact on Nightingale, and that's totally clear from this book. And that's not accidental at all. Catholic religious orders have brought their vision of nursing to the U.S. in profound and dramatic ways and brought their spiritual impact as well. You are the beneficiaries of that. When nurses were so desperately needed during the Civil War, for instance, Catholic women religious were basically the only groups that Secretary Stanton could turn for more nurses. Here's a cool photo of that with Union officers. And here are Sisters of the Holy Cross boarding the first U.S. hospital ship ever in 1862. Some of you may be familiar with the Holy Cross Order, which founded Notre Dame. This is that order, Sisters of the Holy Cross. In fact, there's a cool story about Father Sorin, who founded Notre Dame, hurrying by lantern light across the street to St. Mary's, where they were, to try to go recruit. In fact, the first members of the Navy Nursing Corps were these sisters for their work ferrying wounded soldiers up the Ohio River. Isn't that cool? First members of the Navy Nursing Corps. Before the Civil War, these religious orders had already founded 28 hospitals in the U.S. After the war, these religious orders would go on to found a whopping 220 nursing schools in less than 50 years, thus putting their mark on U.S. healthcare and especially nursing care in ways that obviously still exist to this day. Though it is sobering, isn't it, to think about the fact that most of these sisters and these orders are slowly dying out. It's another way to maybe think a bit soberly about the legacy that's been given us and the need to sort of carry it on for them. And what a vision of nursing and healthcare it is. Whenever I give talks about what it means to train nurses in a Catholic context, I emphasize that while technical skills are of course important, caring for the health of another person means being far more than just being a technically skilled organic plumber or carpenter. Especially as profit-driven medicine has created a hyper-specialized medical environment in which patients are not thought of primarily as people, but as entities with a particular problem with part of their organic plumbing, the nursing vision is that much more important to hold on to. It is a vision of caring for a person, the whole person right in front of you, And precisely because it is about care for the whole person, nursing properly understood cannot be separated from our particular vision of the human person and of the good more broadly. Questions like what counts as healthcare? What counts as violence? Who counts as one of us? Who in fact are the most vulnerable? These questions are already central to caring for the whole person, but they aren't found in any technical, medical, or healthcare textbook. They are questions of theology and philosophy primarily, with assists from other disciplines in the liberal arts, which is why I'm so glad that, from what I've understood anyways, these are taking prominent roles in your education as future nurses. Nurses are very often, should I say this, especially as you guys are going to have a medical school here soon? Am I allowed to say this? Nurses are very often much better than physicians when it comes to both seeing and understanding what it means to take care of a whole person in their physical, mental, and yes, spiritual aspects. What it means to see the good of their patient as situated within a web of relationships with children, parents, other families and friends, their local communities. Indeed, some of the most important work nurses do is correcting physicians who parachute into a situation, attempt to offer an acontextual technical expertise without understanding the broader context of the patient's good. Is that too harsh? We can do it differently. Benedictine could do it differently. But just as crucial, it seems to me, is training future nurses who will insist on your rightful place as practitioners and professionals on medical teams, not just servants or gophers for physicians. You make up the largest group of professionals in healthcare. Without nurses, there would be no healthcare system. But it's not just a matter of numbers. Because of your particular calling to care for the whole person, and especially the whole person in relationship, nurses have to take their rightful place on healthcare teams, and that would lead to significant improvements in patient care as well as delivery of healthcare services. This is especially true given what we've learned in the past couple of decades about social determinants of health and the need to promote healthcare over disease care. In fact, it is not too strong to suggest that we are moving towards a whole new vision of whole person healthcare, one in which nurses will be quite ready to take on their intensely important roles. And that leads us to MAHA. As I mentioned in my opening remarks, it's tough to try to answer the question, what is MAHA? It's just not clear at this early stage what MAHA is, Make America Healthy Again, because it's in a populist call to action coming from many different places and many different people. One of the beautiful things I think about is just how many different kinds of people with many different political affiliations are part of this movement. So here is a summary from me about what MAHA is with the caveat I just made, right? So if you have questions, I'd love to hear from them. I think I'm going to go for about 45 minutes, then we'll have time for questions. MAHA, as I understand it, is a movement that critiques the current state of American health and wellness, often pointing to systemic failures in social structures like the healthcare system, food industry, and regulatory agencies. Proponents argue that these systems prioritize profit over public well-being, leading to widespread chronic illness, environmental degradation, and inequality. MAHA is therefore less a formal theory and more a populist call to action that implicitly or explicitly challenges entrenched social structures. It critiques how systems like industrialized agriculture and big food, pharmaceutical industries and big healthcare, and government bureaucracies have come together to shape U.S. American life in ways that undermine health, both individual and collective health. Its proponents often frame it as a rebellion against a sick status quo, blaming institutional corruption, corporate overreach, and misaligned incentives. Seeing what I need to switch to get more time for question and answer here. maybe focusing in particular on food and agricultural systems and the critique there. A core MAGA grievance is that industrial agriculture and food corporations prioritize cheap processed food over nutrition, contributing to obesity, diabetes, and other epidemics. MAHA critics highlight the role of subsidies for corn and soy used in junk food versus support for other kinds of more holistic or organic farming. And again, there's a structural focus here. Targets the interplay between government policy, farm bills, say, and corporate lobbying, which shapes what food is available and how affordable it is. The critique often extends to the USDA, accused of complicity in promoting unhealthy diets. I'll be playing a clip in a few minutes that gets into more detail about this that I think you'll find, if you haven't seen it already, you'll find very, very interesting. MAHA has become a focus of politics, and especially federal politics, because it frequently calls out not just those food bills, but agencies like the FDA and CDC as being captured by corporate interests, failing to regulate harmful chemicals, pesticides, and additives. Some proponents even link this to a broader conspiracy about elites controlling health outcomes. But I don't think you have to go to that to still make the critique. You're welcome, in my opinion, to make the conspiracy theory, but you don't need to go there. Interestingly, especially for our politics, MAHA often ties health disparities to socioeconomic inequality, arguing that the working class suffers the most from systemic neglect, whether it's exposure to pollutants, lack of healthcare access, or reliance on cheap, unhealthy food. Again, structural focus. It critiques capitalism's role in commodifying health, where profit motives, such as those that drugs companies or fast food chains have, outweigh human lives. This is supposedly from the right, right? MAHA is this right-wing thing. Why do we even talk about right and left? What are we even saying when we say that? It's just like a hopelessly simplistic tool for describing our political culture and imagination. So I'm going to skip a lot here, in part because I want to get to the video and I want to get to the third spot, and then I want to have some interaction with you. But MAHA's lens overall aligns with sociological critiques of social structures, like those from conflict theory, which see power struggles between groups as shaping society. Some of you may have heard of Michel Foucault's understanding of biopower, where institutions control bodies through health policies. However, it's far less academic and more activist, aiming to dismantle or reform the systems rather than just analyze them. That's what I like about it. They don't just stop with words. They're trying to make a difference. And it's even skeptical of the establishment narrative, the academic sort of approach, and again focuses much more on sort of social critique. However, there's something that was missing from what I just said that's an important part of the MAGA critique, and that's that at the heart of this is not just secular social structures, but what our new, whatever you think of him in other contexts, Secretary of Health and Human Services, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., new Secretary of Health and Human Services, his first message after being inaugurated was that at the foundation of our health crisis is a spiritual crisis. We're not just in a health crisis, but a spiritual crisis, and those things are connected. Referencing his travels across the country over recent years, he said he senses that people, and especially young people, feel disconnected. We have a whole generation of kids that feel alienated, dispossessed. They are in an existential crisis, and not only because of their health. There's a purposelessness in their lives and no sense of usefulness or effectiveness or connectedness to their communities. Kennedy argued that this deeper spiritual alienation is what drives the chronic and disease epidemic and the epidemics we're seeing of depression, of suicide, of alcoholism, and drug addiction. Can you believe that our Secretary of Health and Human Services led with this as his message right out of the gate on the very day he was inaugurated? what timeline are we living in? Is this the best timeline? Because this is an unbelievable, for those of us who have been around for a few decades, the idea that we have the leader of Health and Human Services calling for a spiritual realignment, to understand that a spiritual crisis is foundational for our health crisis, is totally bananas. And that is so good. It's so good. But it is such a change, and such a hopeful change. How did we get here? Well, there's many stories one could tell about how we got here. And there's many players in MAHA, to the extent that MAHA is a coherent thing at all, as I mentioned. But I think you're going to have to say that at least part of the story for how we got here is the story of Callie and Casey Means, who are
because she was on 5 minute.
Who are a sibling superstar group of two. They're siblings, brother and sister. They went on the Tucker Carlson show a few months before the election and made such an unbelievable splash that Joe Rogan had them on soon after that, and then Megyn Kelly had them on soon after that, and they were just totally off and running. And at least Callie, the brother, is definitely, as far as I can tell, part of the administration in terms of thinking about what MAHA could be. I'm not so sure. I think Casey might have just had a baby recently. I'm not totally sure about that either. But I thought long and hard about how much to show this of you, and I couldn't get it under 15 minutes. So I hope that's not cheating for a talk to show a 15-minute clip. But it just sets up so perfectly what I think the MAHA opportunity is, and then I want to spend the time after this to try to tie it to Catholic nursing explicitly.
Okay, so I actually think this book is going to, I never say this, but I mean it. I think this book is going to have a big effect on the course of the country. And the reason I think that is because you two are the perfect people to write it. And so I never do this, but I just want to start with.
Can you hear it okay? Okay.
Your bios. So your siblings, Casey and Callie, you happen to have grown up in the same neighborhood as me in Washington, like blocks from me. So I know the world that you're from. You're writing about food, nutrition, the regulatory bodies that are poisoning the country. You are a lobbyist, and you are a Stanford-educated physician. I just want to go through quickly each one, and starting with you. You're a doctor.
Yes.
Tell us the progression of your thinking on this and what it did to your life.
Yeah, absolutely. So, trained at Stanford Medical School, then became trained as a head and neck surgeon.
Undergrad Stanford also.
Undergrad Stanford, medical school at Stanford, then went on to train in head and neck surgery.
Yes.
9 years into my postgraduate training.
How did you do in medical school and college?
Did well, was president of my Stanford class, graduating top of my class with honors in medical school, and went on to a very competitive surgical subspecialty, head and neck.
So I'm just saying that because normally I dismiss credentials out of hand, but these are real credentials and they matter, I think, to your credibility. Okay.
And I did what every good little medical student, wants to do, which is climb the ranks of that academic ladder. But, you
killed it.
Did well,
Yeah.
and I got to the top of that mountain, right? 9 years into my postgraduate training, and I looked around me and I realized that, patients in America are getting destroyed. Children, adults, the elderly. You're so distracted in your little surgical subspecialty, focusing on the ear, nose, and throat where I was, and you get distracted. You look around at what's happening in Americans, and our health is getting worse every single year. Patients in America are getting much sicker every year, more depressed, we're getting infertile, and life expectancy is going down in a country that's spending almost 2x more than any other country in the world.
So before we get into the details of what you did, tell us, of why you did what you did.
Yeah.
Tell us what you did. So
Yeah.
you spent your whole life working toward this goal, you reach the top, and then you decide not to do it?
Yeah. I'm in the operating room in my 5th year of my surgical residency, and I'm looking down at a patient in front of me who's on our 3rd revision sinus surgery. And, I know how to diagnose her. I know how to write the prescriptions. I know how to do the surgery. But what I kind of realized in that moment was like, I have no idea why this patient's actually sick. She has so many other health issues, prediabetes, arthritis. She's got some brain fog. She's got obesity, and she's got this sinus issue. And in my training, I was never, ever, ever taught to look at the whole patient, to look at how all these things are connected. And I was only taught how to, do the surgery and then bill for it. And I realized that there's a huge problem in how we're practicing medicine right now, which is we're ignoring the root causes of why Americans are sick. And we're profiting off of patients getting sick and then doing things to them. That's the way the business model of healthcare works. The way that healthcare, which is the largest and fastest growing industry in the United States, makes money is you have more patients in the system having more things done to them for longer periods of time. And when I kind of put some of these pieces together and realized that my training had totally essentially incapacitated me from really understanding why patients are sick and how to actually help them thrive, I actually had to walk away from the surgical world because I realized that I was going to be making money off of essentially not spending time helping patients understand their health and actually just profiting off their illness.
So
I
9 years into medical training at Stanford, you gave it up voluntarily.
On my birthday, 30th birthday, I walked into the office of the chair of the department and I put down the scalpel and I walked away and I devoted my life to why are Americans getting sicker every year? Why are 50% of American children dealing with a chronic health issue? This was less than 1% 50 years ago. Why is our health getting destroyed the more that we spend? And
so that's what did they say when you walk into your colleagues at Stanford and say, I'm giving it up at 30?
It wasn't really a conversation. I knew that I couldn't cut into one more person until I understood why Americans are getting sicker every single year. I think that the unfortunate thing is that doctors don't really understand because every level of our education is systematically focused on blinding us from thinking about root causes. We have over 100 medical and surgical subspecialties right now. And how you make money in the American healthcare system is you take a patient with 10 different issues and you send them to 10 different specialists, put them on 10 different meds, maybe they eventually have 10 different surgeries. You never actually are taught how to put the pieces together, look at the whole body as a system, which of course it is. And part of this is because who are the people underwriting our medical education? It's the pharmaceutical companies. We are taught how to be very algorithmic and robotic in how we look at patients. And so ultimately I left the surgical world and I went down the rabbit hole of asking why. Why are we getting sicker every year?
It's just such a radical move to do something like that.
Yeah. I mean,
your whole life you're working toward a goal and then you give it up?
Yeah.
After 9 years?
Yeah. This is the thing that I understood and that I am working and we are spending our lives to evangelize this book, Good Energy, is that the reasons why Americans are getting sicker every year are very simple. Americans want to be healthy. Americans do not want to die early. They do not want to see their kids with all these chronic health issues like autism and food allergies and obesity and prediabetes and 40% of teens with mental health issues. No one wants this, but the system is rigged against the American patient to create diseases and then profit off of them. This is happening across almost every lever of our major industries, from processed food to tech to pharma. And so really what Americans need to understand is that these trends can stop immediately. We need to understand why we're sick, which is our primarily our toxic food system and the ways that systematically several industries are profiting off of our addiction and illness. And if we can understand that and create very simple top-down and bottom-up strategies to address it, Americans will become rapidly healthier. And so as a physician, I took an oath to do no harm. And I took an oath to help patients thrive. And so the way that we can do that is by helping people understand the levers of corruption that are essentially keeping us sick.
I guess the reason I'm pressing you, and you're the sort of person, this is a company clearly doesn't want to talk about herself, which is great. But I think it's relevant because it speaks to the intensity of your commitment and to your sincerity. So you're giving up the prize, you're giving up the money because you really believe this.
Yes.
And I think I just want to establish that at the outset.
Thank you.
Before we say anything more. So you're her brother, you're very close, I happen to know that. And you're obviously proud of your sister. She's president of her class at Stanford. It's the kind of thing like, oh, my sister's at Stanford. She's at Stanford Medical School. She decides not to practice surgery, the most impressive of all specialties. What's your reaction to this?
I called her and said she was a complete idiot. I mean, we were raised in Washington, D.C., right next to you, kind of conditioned to climb up the ladder.
Of course.
I went to Stanford. I went to Harvard Business School. That was what life is about, just kind of collecting those credentials. Casey, research at the NIH, as we talked about, top of her Stanford med school class. To me, that was it. And truly, and you hit on this, she had this is her life. This was her identity. This was everything to her. And she bravely stepped away with no plan, just from a moral obligation. And I thought she was a complete idiot. And what I know now, and what I've been radicalized on, is she has convinced me that this is the most important issue in the country. It's an issue of corruption that starts at Stanford Med School being 50% funded by pharma and not training doctors on one nutrition class. Stanford Med School, Harvard Med School, 90% of med schools don't offer or require one nutrition class. Doctors simply aren't learning why people are getting sick, which we'd all assume they do. 80% of the course loads in pharmacology. It's on how to take people that are getting sicker and sicker and manage those conditions, not to cure them. And that's a huge problem because that dynamic of the largest industry in the country is destroying human capital.
So as your sister is on one end of the equation, you're on the other. So you both have, you're from a community of strivers. That's what DC is.
Exactly.
And merit badge gatherers. And you've gotten two of the greatest merit badges ever.
Right.
HBS, Stanford Medical School. But you're all of a sudden finding yourself in Washington. Can you just explain your background a little bit?
Yeah, so Casey was a bit smarter than me on the biology route. I wanted to be contributing to politics from an early age and went to Stanford to go back into politics. Studied economics, political science, went straight back to campaigns after school. What I learned quickly is that then campaigns over, you work for the biggest spenders in DC, and I found myself across the desks from food industry and the farm industry. The farm industry spends 5 times more in DC than the oil industry. By far the biggest spender. Bipartisan, you're working for pharma. But starting with food, I learned early on that the food industry, and this is my construct, the food industry and the processed food industry was created by the cigarette industry. And I think this is very telling and something I learned. So in the 1990s, the 2 largest food companies in the world were R.J. Reynolds and Philip Morris. What happened is when the Surgeon General way too late in the 1980s said cigarettes were maybe problematic, these were some of the largest companies in the world with the largest cash piles of any company in the world. So what they did is they used their cash piles to buy food companies. We think about the 80s as the Wall Street era M&A, a lot of deals. The 2 biggest M&A deals up until 1990 in world history were cigarette companies buying food companies. So you had in the 90s, these 2 cigarette companies very strategically do 2 things. They shifted their thousands of scientists who were experts at making cigarettes addictive to the food department. So we had the rise of ultra-processed food where our food now is a science experiment. The second thing they did is they shifted their lobbying. So the cigarette industry, of course, was the biggest, lobbying spenders and had a good playbook. They shifted their playbook on lobbying and rigging institutions of trust to food, so they created the food pyramid. So the cigarette industry, through the food companies they bought, paid off the FDA, the USDA, Harvard to create reports saying sugar doesn't cause obesity, and they lobbied for the food pyramid in the 1990s, we all remember, which said, animal-based fats are bad, carbs are good. Remember, carbs and sugar were basically the base of the pyramid. So the American diet, because of that, because we trust our medical institutions, which they know, we shifted our diet significantly to ultra-processed food. It was very intentional, the food pyramid. That was a ultra-processed food marketing document that carbs were fine, sugar was fine. And that shifted, and you look at dietary patterns. Today, a child diet is 70% ultra-processed food. Now, what does that mean, right? Those are literally foods invented by the cigarette industry to addict kids. Obviously we've got sugar, but there's thousands of different ingredients and science concoctions that scientists work in a lab to make it more palatable, to make it more addictive. So food consumption, calorie consumption has skyrocketed. And the byproduct of these toxic ingredients that the cigarette industry I watched and helped with this, bought off the USDA, bought off the FDA, is they wreak havoc among our cells. The foundation of our diet is ingredients that we aren't biologically made to eat, that didn't exist 100 years ago. The foundation of our diet is 3 things when you look at any label. It's added sugar, processed sugar, which basically didn't exist 100 years ago, is just from natural sources. Ultra-processed grains, which were invented 100 years ago, the processing takes the fiber off. They're basically hidden sugars, devoid of nutritional value. And seed oils. Seed oils are the top source of American calories. And this is actually
seed oil. The top
yeah.
source of American calories.
Soybean oil, canola oil. This is the baseline of American calories right now. And these seed oils were actually created by John D. Rockefeller as a byproduct of oil production. It's basically engine lubricant. And the Rockefeller and those aligned with him actually lobbied to have this suitable for human consumption. That's how seed oils came into the American diet. They're much cheaper, but they're highly inflammatory. And just by definition, just at the highest level, these ingredients and all the chemicals we can't name that are in ultra-processed food are not natural ingredients that our bodies are made to handle. So there's, as we talk about in Good Energy, this produces a lot of side effects to our cells. The food industry isn't trying to kill Americans. They're trying to make food cheap and addictive. And what I learned, in the...
I'll stop it there. I was going to have it go for a couple more minutes, but I think you get the gist. Maybe more than just the gist. I originally had it going to 16 minutes and 11 seconds, and the note I have for the line on which to finish it, though, is the best thing for that industry is a child getting sick. It's just a statement of fact, right? It's not necessarily a conspiracy theory. It's just the economic reality, especially if you can keep them sick for their entire lives, right, with chronic illness. How can we meet the MAHA moment? Well, there's a lot we can do. First, let me just say a little bit more about the financial and economic realities if that ain't come through enough. We live in the age of Doge and cutting and trying to get our economic house in order. There's no possible way that we can do this without fundamentally changing how we spend money on healthcare. It just won't. It's the most important part of our federal budget. Clearly, maybe the most, or one of the most important contributors to our inflationary cycle is healthcare. It's not talked about nearly as much as other things, but it's super, super important. Overall healthcare costs are anticipated to rise by an average of 5.5% per year over the next several years, from 3.5 trillion in 2017 up to 6 trillion by 2027. 6 trillion, the T. Furthermore, healthcare spending is projected to increase faster than the economy, growing by 17.9% of the gross domestic product in 2017 to 19.4% of GDP by 2027. Because of these issues, the pressure and complexity on the healthcare system have increased dramatically over the last decade. Both of these, coupled with a growing awareness of patients' medical and care needs, have led to more and more systemic thinkers to demand that nurses play a greater role in the direction of healthcare. A few years ago, I wrote a book called Bioethics for Nurses, A Christian Moral Vision, with a former student of mine who's now a professor of nursing. And I was just stunned to realize a number of things in doing the research for that book, but just how many secular sources are just begging nurses and nursing to step into the breach and lead here. In fact, the Institute of Medicine has publicly called upon nurses to lead efforts towards healthcare change. And this call for nurse leadership actually began several years ago when the data could no longer hide the fact that our healthcare system was broken. We've mentioned some reasons already for why nurses need to step into the breach, right? This is an argument for whole person care. Nobody does whole person care better than nurses, right? The complaining that Casey was doing is something that fits directly into the critique that so many nurses have of doctors, right? Is that you are specialists and you're very good specialists and you know all the technical stuff, maybe even better than we do, but we know about the whole person. We care for the whole person. We live with the whole person in a web of relationships, right? In the web of relationships. And Catholic nursing in particular, and Catholic healthcare more broadly, has a very, very important role to play here. One of the reasons I'm so excited about the possibility of MAHA is precisely because there's a Catholic-shaped hole in what they are doing, and Catholics need to step in and fill it. 1 in 7 beds in the United States is in a Catholic institution, 1 in 7. We have all these schools, universities, medical schools, nursing schools, even high school and primary schools could play a very significant role, right, in what we're trying to get done here. And how about Catholic social teaching? Have you guys learned about Catholic social teaching? I hope you have. Doesn't this sound like just like a fastball right down the middle for Catholic social teaching? Like, let's put it in the left center field bleachers. Come on. This is the moment, right? This is what Catholic social teaching is made to do. Thinking about structures and systems, obviously, but thinking about, I like how some of the responses of MAHA has been to focus on locality and locally sourced foods and becoming aware of the structures and systems that produce your food, and focusing on the local, focusing on subsidiarity is just obviously right down the middle there. So interesting that MAHA is focused on the poor as the most significant, obviously, group that's harmed by this. And critiques of markets which do not serve people, rather than people demanding that markets serve them, especially the most vulnerable. And the weaknesses of MAHA, I think, play to our strengths. There's a kind of vagueness to MAHA sometimes, right? Could be problematic. Talking about ending corporate corruption or something is a nice line to use, but if we can dive more deeply in what needs to happen, especially as a positive replacement, I think we end up in a better place. This is, again, the kind of Catholic-sized hole, I think, that's in MAHA. We can provide not just the no, but what the yes should be. Also, evidence, because it's not necessarily an academic movement. Sometimes activist movements like this can be prone to unfounded conspiracy theories and not evidence-based claims. Catholic intellectual tradition, especially in healthcare, could be an important pushback on that, right? And say we are committed to doing the best science. We're committed to having the best evidence in support of our conclusions, and we're committed to following the evidence wherever it goes. I only have a few minutes left here. Let me finish by saying I'm not totally sure when a moment like this will come again. I'm loath to say what's in the mind of Providence and all of this, but I'm sort of astonished that we're here with MAHA at the moment. It's, again, such an interesting, eclectic mix of people and perspectives, energies. We also, for whatever else you think about the administration, we have an incredibly bold administration that's willing to try new things and push against the status quo and see if it's a mistake that we can correct later rather than just fade into the background of the previously understood wisdom. We have opportunity to build bridges across political differences here. I think this is where Catholics can really step into the culture, be authentic supporters of the gospel rather than idolatrous focusers on a particular secular political agenda. We should be able to unite the so-called right and the so-called left. Again, I'm not sure what this refers to actually, especially given MAHA's really complicated and interesting political confluence of folks. I also think it's very important that that we understand too that our dementia crisis, something I'll talk about in more detail in my lecture at 7:30, more and more people are talking about as a crisis of metabolism, and maybe even some people are calling, in particular, Alzheimer's disease type 3 diabetes. And if you come to my talk tonight, you'll see just how, what a dangerous moment we are in when it comes to the dementia crisis. We already treat this population terribly, and if nothing is done, the people with dementia, numbers of people with dementia are going to double in the next 20 years and triple in the next 30 years. As I'll argue tonight, I think we're on the verge of mass killing via physician-assisted suicide if we don't find a way to move this in a different direction. And it could be, if it's right to call Alzheimer's disease type 3 diabetes, MAHA will have to play a significant role in addressing that too. And this is another thing that won't come again. But the final thought I want to leave you with is MAHA simply does not succeed without the direct help of Catholic healthcare, and especially without the direct help of the vision of Catholic nurses and Catholic nursing. Thank you very much.